Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Before I introduce our speakers, it's our custom to introduce ourselves, going around the room just stating our names. My name is Tom Bruein.
I'm David.
Greg. Paul Shepard. My name is Ray Dyer.
Peter.
My name is Brian Phillip. Marty.
Jim Stewart.
My name is David. My name is Jerry. I am Ed King. My name is Steve.
My name is Glenn. I'm Richard.
Richard.
My name is Clint.
Jack.
My name is Don Weepert.
Jim Winters.
My name is Tage.
Baruch Golden.
My name is Roy.
Cass Brayton.
Edgar Antonio.
Mario.
Kay Matsuda.
Jared Martin.
My name is Michael.
Paul.
My name is Andre.
My name is Carl Wolf.
Marvin Snow.
Doug Hall.
Joshua Maniscalco.
Ron.
My name is Harlan Shapiro.
My name is Gary.
Eric Anderson.
Did we miss anyone? Is anyone joining us for the first or second time? Joshua?
Yeah.
Welcome back. Our topic today is restorative justice and the Dharma. Our speakers are Bhavani Kludt and Ivan Corado. Bhavani began active spiritual practice in the yoga tradition in 1990 and became a yoga teacher in 1996. She started to include Vipassana practice in 1998 and began teaching yoga and meditation in the San Francisco County jails in 1999. Her home sangha is San Francisco Insight, where she serves on its steering committee, and her primary teacher is Eugene Cash. Ivan Corado is a facilitator in the Resolve to Stop the Violence Project, or RSVP, in the San Francisco County Jail. RSVP is designed to support men to stop their violence to themselves and others. Ivan was introduced to yoga as a participant in the RSVP program in 2008 and has continued his own personal practice since then. He keeps a regular yoga practice as part of his work in the restorative justice field and his own personal recovery from alcohol addiction. Bhavani and Ivan, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I see a familiar face. I have to acknowledge Don Weepert. He was one of the first people that, when I got involved in teaching in the jail, that Don was involved at the same time and kind of helped and brought me in and showed me some of the ropes and things like that. So it's a pleasure to be here and to see you here. So thank you. I just wanted to share a little bit about, why would someone get into doing this crazy thing of teaching yoga and meditation in the jail? And I have a brother who spent 12 years in the federal penitentiary. And so, I have a heart connection with anyone who is incarcerated. Irrespective of what they've done, I know that everyone who is incarcerated is first and foremost somebody's brother, somebody's dad, somebody's uncle, a sister, a mother. And so I know that in the core of my being. And when my brother was incarcerated and I was starting to go through my yoga training, my brother had a friend who in prison who was very interested in yoga, and my brother asked me to write to this guy. My brother was totally not into it, but this other guy was. And so I started writing to him, and I realized how beneficial these practices can be for someone who's incarcerated if they're open to it and if they're interested. And so when I was done with my yoga training and making some changes in my life, I decided I wanted to start teaching in the jail, and I put some feelers out, and anyway, Don and I connected. I connected with some other people and began teaching really to the general population in the jail and with men at that point. And it became really evident to me early on just how powerful these practices can be for people who are incarcerated without a huge amount of practice. I remember one class that I was teaching out at San Bruno, general population again, and there was a guy who came to the class for the first time, and then the next week he showed up again. And at the end of the class, we would always have check-ins. And this guy checked in the second week, and he said that during the week after this first class that he had attended, that he was involved in an incident. So, that means a conflict of some sort. And he said that, first he started by saying, I'm really tense, I'm really anxious, I'm a 3-strike candidate, I might be going to the pen for 25 to life. So he'd been around the block. And anyway, so he talked about that he had been in this incident in the tiers, and he said I was just going to act in my normal way. He said, and at the last minute I stopped myself, and I thought, I'm going to go away and think about this and meditate on it. And he said, I did. And I stopped and I thought about it. And then I went back and I handled it in a completely different way. And he said, everybody was shocked. So this was after one class that he was able to stop himself from probably getting into a fight. That's probably what that was all about, which could have just escalated all the charges against him, et cetera, et cetera. And then another incident that happened actually with the group that Don and I were working with. In the yoga tradition, what I offer is a deep relaxation at the end of the stretching, and then we do that before we move into a guided meditation. And in that deep relaxation, it's not a focused, concentrated kind of meditation, but it's definitely a very relaxed one. And those of you who do any yoga practice, you're probably familiar with a shavasana type of practice at the end of a class. And I would talk, when I guide people through this, I talk about finding that there's a place of peace within each and every one of us. And if you find that place of peace, to just rest there for a while. And this guy had been quite restless in the classes and a little bit disruptive. And probably after the third or fourth class that he came to, at the end of the class, he came up to me and he said, every week you've talked about this peaceful place inside. I had no idea what you were talking about. He said, but today I went there for the first time in my life, and it was so wonderful. So again, these two examples just really validated for me that these practices can be very, very powerful. So I was very inspired to continue doing this work, and I had a friend who was also working in the San Francisco County Jail in this program, RSVP, Resolve to Stop the Violence, and she was telling me, oh, you have to come over and observe this program, blah, blah, blah. And so finally I did, and it was a very powerful session that I observed that day. But at the end of the session, a trainer was giving a training piece about the core curriculum for the program, which is called Man Alive. And this training just totally amazed me because it was all about people choosing to be violent based on it, that it's a decision that's made to either intimate or violate, and I'm not going to get into too much of this because maybe Ivan wants to talk about this more as well. But that it is a choice, and that we learn our violence, we can unlearn it, and it's based on belief systems and thoughts and choices. And in the training, it just so touched me that, wow, this is just basically the teachings from our Eastern traditions, whether it's Vipassana or whether it's yoga or whatever tradition we want to, or what label we want to put on it. It was like, it's all of those same teachings. So at the end of the training, I went up to him and I said, this is amazing, and you must have a yoga meditation component to this program, don't you? And of course, this is San Francisco, right? And he said, we don't, and we really should. So that was all I needed, and I went back and talked to some of the other teachers that I was working with. In fact, some people that you may know, John King, maybe some of you were friends with John King, and from the San Francisco Zen Center, and Martha DeBarros, and another fellow named Jim Needles, all people who were from the Buddhist community. And the four of us got together and put together a proposal and presented it. And the program director said, yes, let's do it. And then we brought yoga and meditation into RSVP. And again, there's so much synergy, I feel, between the teachings in the program and our teachings. In the program, the men do a practice where they identify the image that they have, that when they're in that image, they act out their violence, and they call that image a hitman. And we, of course, in our tradition, we talk about our authentic self or an image, and that's the same kind of thing that they work on in the program. And the tool that we work with the men in the jail and in this program about noticing when that image is threatened, and then making a choice about how are you going to respond or how are you going to react in this moment. To pause, take a breath, noticing what you're feeling, noticing what the thoughts are. Well, we call that mindfulness, don't we? So it's all similar, truths are universal, and that's what was coming through for me in this program. One interesting difference, however, between what we teach in the program and what I hear in our community is the Buddha talked about unskillful behaviors coming from causes and conditions for a person. And although we're all, we have this mindfulness practice where we make choices and things like that, this whole idea of causes and conditions is something we don't bring into our program at all. And well, I shouldn't say at all. We do bring it in, but in a different context, because this program is all about accountability, that I am absolutely responsible for what I do in this world. It's also about not identifying that that's who I am, but I'm absolutely responsible for it. And if I blame it, or if I say it's because of this person, or it's because of the system, or it's because of I didn't have any money, or anything else, then in our program that's called blame. And our program is all about accountability, and we don't allow for excuses and blame. And I think on a bigger scope, a bigger picture, we understand that causes and conditions do, I think, nurture unskillful behaviors. But certainly in a program like this, where our intention is to support behavioral change, we don't want to let that blame come in. There are ways and we absolutely connect the dots about cycles of violence, that violence is learned and it can be unlearned. And so part of the practice is also learning about where we learned our violence I have learned so much more personally about my own family system and the violence in my family from doing this work in the jail. I was in complete denial of most of the violence that I grew up with, and now I understand the causes and conditions behind my brother and his incarceration, and he was an adult and he made the choices that he made. So it's all true. It's all true. On a personal level, doing this work is a constant practice for me in non-attachment. And I'm so clear about non-attachment not being non-caring, because I absolutely care for all of the people that I interact with, and I absolutely wish them well and the best, and hope that they can that they make different choices and change their behaviors. And I so know that it's not. I can't own it. It's theirs. It's their choice. It's their life, and every time I notice myself. Well, I remember in one of the groups that now I do more than just work as a volunteer teaching yoga and meditation. I've actually been hired into the program and facilitate some classes, and this came out of my volunteer work, but now I'm actually working on staff. And in one of the groups that I facilitate, there was a man in this group who was just very charismatic, and he really was very accountable and was active in the group and that sort of thing. And I came in one week and he was gone out of the program, and I'm like, what happened to so-and-so? Well, come to find out that on the weekend, his 4-year-old daughter had come in with her mother, who was his partner, of course, and pinned inside her dress was a bag of cocaine being smuggled into him. And I was absolutely devastated. Of course, he was removed from the program, et cetera, et cetera. And I was devastated. And my reaction to that, of course, was like, whoa, there's a huge amount of attachment here going on. I mean, I can feel sad, and it's appropriate to feel sad, but this was too much. And so ever since that incident, I've really had to really watch that for myself. And if I go there and allow myself to get attached, my fear is that I'll burn out. And by just doing the best I can in any moment without that attachment, I think it allows me to show up and not burn out on this work. And so it's a very important practice for me. And just along with that, I think helping me work with the non-attachment is, I know the Buddha talked about not trying to understand the laws of karma, or it will drive us crazy. So I don't try to understand the laws of karma, but I actually trust in it. And that helps me with my non-attachment, because what I'm able to do is just step back from what people are doing and whatever they've done it to, or whomever they've done it to, and whatever's gone on, and just trust that there's a bigger picture behind all of this than what I can see, and to just remind myself that everything is unfolding exactly as it should be. And I can't necessarily understand what all that is, but I can trust in it and continue to show up and continue to do the best that I can in any moment. And so it's this work and life and what we all do in whatever we're doing and however we're engaged, it's bigger than any one of us. And I feel very honored and blessed to be a part of this process that I am a part of, and have these teachings to support me as well as to share them with others. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend here, and then we'll have some time for Q&A.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivan. I'm I'm a facilitator in the RSVP program, and my responsibilities as facilitator is to work with 20 men in groups every day inside the county jail to start looking at their violence. How we facilitate the group, it's a peer process. So we have senior men in the group, which I work a lot closer with and train them so that they can facilitate the group and teach the information to newer men that come into the program. So that's essentially our process. And like Bhavani was mentioning, it's about accountability. So what we support men to do is to really identify that they're responsible for their own violence and learning how to identify it, what the root causes of them are, so that they can stop their own violence. We're not asking men to stop, their partner's violence, their family's violence, their cellmate or any of the other men in the group. It's about starting to take responsibility and taking action to stop your own violence. And we just support each other in how to do that. So how I got to RSVP was, through my own violence, so I was arrested. I was brought into the program, and that's where I met Bhavani, and I met the other facilitators in there. It was a really odd space for me to be in, to see men in orange leading the classes, and the facilitators were just sitting back and, filtering out the information and supporting the process, but the men were teaching each other. So for me, it was kind of like, well, I thought I was coming into a program. This doesn't look like a program. But the more time that I spent sitting in those circles and sitting with the men that were in there, I got to see how they were starting to open up and hold themselves accountable. So like the accountability piece was what struck me the most about the program. So where I'm at now is that I've gone through my process and I've actually done the work that it takes to come back into the jail to be a facilitator. So one thing for me in this restorative justice topic, it's really powerful to walk into a group with a guy that you've done time with, and he's still there and doing his time. Right? So now I'm the facilitator to a guy that was actually one of my peers in the group. And so for me, that's a really powerful process, and just really thinking about how the restorative justice principles and people that advocate for that, how those things are possible, right? And the guys, the first day when I walked in, like the guys were like, "You really came back?" And I was like, "Yeah." There was about 15 guys at that time. My first day when I came back, when I started working inside the jail, there was about 15 guys that I had done time with in there. And they're seeing me in street clothes. They're seeing me with a jail clearance signed by the sheriff of San Francisco, and for them it's like it made sense. The program started to make sense on a different level for them at that point, and I felt really empowered, just as in my own process, but also empowered in a way where now I can actually, that we talk about, we sit there and practice these tools, but for me to walk into the dorm that day, the tools became reality for these men. I think, but more importantly, the tools became reality for me because it was validation about the work that it takes to engage in a process. And that's what we're asking these men to do, is to engage in their own work so that they can change their own lives, right? Because Bhavani coming in and doing yoga is not going to change my life unless I take that in. Me coming in and facilitating a group for guys that I work with isn't necessarily going to change their life unless they make that decision. And so, when Bhavani was talking about where violence is a decision that we make, that's one of the things that's been beneficial about the yoga practices for me, is that the yoga practices have given me a way to not be violent. It's given me an option to use. Those are some tools that I can use in order not to be violent. So, using violence, whether it's emotional violence, verbal violence, physical violence, I knew how to do that. Growing up as a young man, the conditioning that I grew up in, the neighborhood, the family structure, all those things contributed to these ideas and beliefs that I had about what violence was. And ultimately, violence was acceptable. It was an option in order for me to get what I wanted. What I didn't have was, these mindful practices and these mindful tools about still getting what I wanted, right? Still getting a certain level of fulfillment in my life without being violent. And so having these tools and ironically, having these tools inside of a jail setting, it's really powerful. When you can sit in a group of men, 48 of us, to just sit in silence, for 20 minutes, on Wednesday. We just sit in complete silence, and we all just, sit in that space and really take in, some truth about ourselves. And I think that for me, this is what these practices offer, men that are incarcerated. It gave me an opportunity to really sit with my own truth in that moment, right? Without judgment. I'm in this orange jumpsuit. I'm assigned to this cell. I'm assigned to live with this person that I really don't know anything about. I'm living in this community with complete strangers and men who are violent. They can snap at any moment if they choose to. Right? So it's like bringing those realities and almost making them safe to explore. Because if I want to continue this life, then I can continue making the decisions that I have that have gotten me to this point. Or I can really find that peaceful place within myself and use these practices. Because now that I've gotten to know that peaceful place, I can give that to myself now. Right? And I'm not dependent on any outside relationship, whether it's from my wife, my kids, the community, the guys that I grew up with, whatever my belief system at that moment that told me I need to stay connected to these relationships that were unhealthy for me, right? And I can really start looking at some truths and really making some decisions about what is healthy for me, right? What is that peaceful place? And how can I give myself that? So in first stage, we support men to look at their violence and look how to stop and to identify how to stop their violence. In second stage of the program, it's all about self-awareness. So the practices that we use here are really beneficial in second stage, because now men can really start taking a look at what's going on, right? What's this hurt that I've been separating from, right? Because now that I've found this peaceful place, there's some certain realities that are coming up, right? I've grown up in a violent environment. I've grown up in a violent home. I've grown up without a father. I've grown up without a father and a mother, being raised by a grandmother, an aunt, or whoever. So it's all these realities that start coming up in second stage. And the authentic self in second stage that's when we start teaching men how to identify with themselves and who they are. So I've done the work for myself in second stage, and we do an exercise to help men identify that. So for my authentic self, in one exercise was the caring, nurturing spirit, right? And that's that peaceful place for me. So we actually, that peaceful place in second stage, we actually give it a name, for men to take a look at that, so that way in situations where I'm interacting with somebody, am I being caring in this moment? Am I being nurturing in this moment? Am I equal in spirit with myself in this moment? And that's the process that we teach men through Mount Alive, is to get back into who they are. Because the social conditioning that tells me that a man is supposed to be whatever a man is supposed to be isn't realistic. And so we really support men back into their own reality, and what's true in the moment. Because like Bhavani was mentioning the hitman. The hitman, we help men identify that the hitman works in the past and the hitman works in the future. Right? The hitman's never present in the moment. And so with the Buddhist principles that we use, we really bring in men into that moment. Because this is all that I have. This is what's true. Is this interaction that I'm having with all of you in this moment. This is true. Right? But my hitman could tell me, no, you need to run out of here and you need to be doing something else, You should be at home watching the game. Right? No. But I can separate from myself and separate from my reality that quick. And that's what the hitman is all about. It's the separation from what's true and who I am. And so that's what we work with men. So how I use the practices, every day I meditate after work. Coming out of a jail environment, there's 60 men that we work with. We go back and forth and into the different dorms to recruit men. We do interventions. Men give us news about their cases. They're looking at life. They're looking at 10 years. They're looking at 20 years. So it's a lot of heavy information, a lot of emotional counter-transference is going on. So I really have to take care of myself. And so these practices for myself are a way to make sure that I'm safe at the end of the day. And that way that I don't fuse up with a violent environment that I'm working in, and continue to bring that violence home to my family. And I have to give that a container. I have to give that a space, to give myself relief, so that I can sustain a career in doing this work, because it is very heavy. And we hear some very hurtful things that men experience. And so if I'm not careful, I can take that on and now I can start to blame myself for the decisions that they've made. So the meditation for me is very, very important at the end of the day. And I give myself 20 to 30 minutes minimum every day. So that's it. So can it open up for questions? Any questions that anyone has?
Yeah, I just had could you just say a little bit more about the concept of restorative justice?
So how I've experienced restorative justice is there's three components to it. So there's the victim's voice, there's the community's voice, and the perpetrators. And so that's how our program is set up. So we work directly with the perpetrators of violence within our program. On Wednesdays, we have survivors of violence that come in and speak. And then they give a disclosure about violence that they've suffered. And then we also engage the community in restorative justice. So my work in that is working with USF and their Theater for Social Justice Department, we put together a production. And we engage the community in the discussion of perpetrators of violence and survivors of violence. And so that's how I've personally engaged all three levels of the restorative justice principle.
Restorative justice is kind of a different concept from the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system focuses on the crime is committed and then the state steps in, and the victim is essentially removed from the process. And so restorative justice is all about, as Ivan said, keeping those three pieces together. And oftentimes victims and offenders, the restorative kind of model will have the offender do restoration to repair the harm that was done. And in our program, we've done various sorts of things around that, repairing the harm. And the theater project that Ivan's a part of is that. I've also been involved in some restoration work where we've done victim-offender dialogues and mediations and things like that, where there's been accountability and de-escalation of situations and things. So
yeah. And so when we say survivors of violence, we identify the person who the harm was done to directly, but we also look at secondary, third, and fourth victims of violence. So if I do violence directly to someone, then their children are affected by that, their family are affected. So we acknowledge them as secondary and third victims. If I do violence in the community, around the neighborhood, those people are direct victims of my violence. So for me, just an example with the production that we did with USF, my victim was in the audience on one of those nights. My children, my family, co-workers were in the audience that night, because what happened is I got arrested and from one day to the next, then I'm no longer a coworker. And there's this whole what happened to Ivan? Where did he go? And so then that was a way for me to engage in a dialogue with them and not be confrontational. It wasn't threatening. It was just me on stage holding myself accountable for the violence that I've done.
I was just wondering, it sounds like a wonderful program, and I was just wondering if it's permeated out to other county jails, or if the state is doing anything with this, because we have just such a huge problem, and it's so expensive to maintain the prison system.
I think the closest that anyone's come to reproducing this program is in Westchester County, New York. I think that's where it is, right? Yeah. And then, believe it or not, Austin, Texas has reproduced certain aspects of the program as well. The state, forget it. Our state system is, they're not. I mean, this program was developed here in San Francisco County, with the blessings of Sheriff Hennessy. And you can read more about it, actually. Sonny Schwartz, who was really the guiding force behind it, wrote a book called Dreams from the Monster Factory. So she talks more about that. But we get visitors from all over the world, actually, coming to observe the program, but very little of it has been reproduced. Jacques Verdun, I don't know if any of you know him. He's involved at Spirit Rock, but he's got an Insight Prison project at San Quentin, and that has some similar aspects to the program from ours, and he's observed our program, but that's not actually funded by the state. He gets foundation funding for that. So little bits and pieces, but nothing on a major level. Yeah, good question. I wish. Oh, okay.
I'm curious how you introduce the notion of violence or aggression toward the self, and whether the men take to that notion or understand like internalizing the violence. It's case by case. So, we ask men to sit in our groups for a minimum of 8 weeks. It really takes 16 weeks for a man to really start holding himself accountable and really taking a look at, how me being physically violent to someone is violent to myself. So I think the men in the beginning, it's an odd concept, because wait a minute, I beat somebody up. How's that violent to me? So how we support men to take a look at that is by looking at the impact of their violence. Right, so in the process, we identify impact as loss. So when I'm violent to someone, what do I lose? Because we don't identify violence as a gain; we identify violence as a loss, right? And so we look at that. We take a look at what the victim loses in that moment, what the community loses in that moment, what the family loses in that moment, and ultimately, we ask men to look at themselves last. So that's when a guy starts to realize the impact of his violence by taking a look at what everyone else loses first, because then it's real easy to I came to jail, okay, cool. When we do this exercise, that's always the first answer. So we always point guys back to what did your victim lose, and we look at the injuries, whether they were physical or emotional injuries, and how the victims are impacted. So the way that we support men to look at how that's violent to myself is by taking a look at the impact of our violence.
And if I could add a little bit to that too, a lot of the people who are incarcerated have addiction issues, and we look at that as well as violence to the self. That by using that's doing violence to body and spirit first, and then it can escalate from there. But maybe the first violence is the violence that's to the self in choosing to use something that then you're out of control. So that's a place. Yeah.
Do the men self-select to go into the program, or are they encouraged to go into the
We try to get the jail classification to bring in all the guys or as many as possible who have been arrested for domestic violence. That because violence starts in the home, and so if we can address domestic violence, we feel that really helps to stop the violence before it spreads out into the community. But so classification sometimes brings guys in, but then as Ivan mentioned before, the facilitators, they'll go out and recruit, talk to guys in different locations, and sometimes guys just hear about it and want to come in. Sometimes the judges know about our program, and sometimes they'll say, I'm not going to sentence you right now. I want you to spend 3 months in RSVP, and we'll see how you're doing, and we'll go from there. So some of them are court mandated into the program. Some choose to be there. Quite frankly, I think the guys who choose to be there do the best work. Yeah.
I have a question regarding attachment in terms of burnout. I think you both talked about that, I think. And I think it carries over into all aspects of life for everyone, and I tend to be attached to outcome a lot, and it causes a lot of suffering. And I'm wondering, it seems like a dichotomy. How can you care about somebody and not being attached at the same time? It must be very difficult. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on any techniques you can use. Meditation was one thing you mentioned.
Yeah.
After the work.
So for me, it's being supportive to myself. It's just validating the fact that I do have a relationship with this person that I'm working with, right? Whether it's in a jail or, because I do some mentorship with young men on, that aren't in jail as well. I work with people in recovery outside of the jail. So it's about just validating the fact that I'm having this relationship and this interaction. But again, it's just really being clear that when they make their own decision, it's about validating what I lose for myself, not based on what just their decision, but now here's this boundary that's been compromised, and so what am I losing in this boundary, and that I can give myself back to reset that boundary, right? Because if I'm working with somebody and they relapse, there's a boundary that's been broken there, right? And it's not safe for me to be around someone who's active in their addiction. So what do I lose in that, right? I lose my own safety and in that. And so how can I give myself safety back and still be supportive to this person in their relapse? So it's about really identifying what I lose in this moment so that I can give myself that back. That's one of the tools that I use, is just to really acknowledge that there's a boundary that's been broken here. And did I break the boundary? Absolutely not. I've kept my agreement in this relationship, right? So my agreement is intact. This person is the one that broke their agreement, and I need to find a way to renegotiate that with them if they're willing, and if they're not, then I need to keep myself safe. And that's my number one priority now, is making myself safe at all times and being clear on what my boundaries are.
And for me, around that non-attachment and still caring, is being real clear that for me the non-attachment piece allows me to love absolutely unconditionally. My love for that person isn't conditional on what they do, and that's where the karma, my trust in karma has to come in as well. It's like, okay, this is a choice they're making at this point. I can't support that choice, and I might have some boundary issues that I need to keep myself safe around, and again, just trusting that they're on a journey that I don't know when that journey began. It may have been lifetimes ago, for all I know. And that this is one part of it and one piece of it, and to just trust that as long as I stay true to my truths and the teachings, that I'm doing all I can do, and to just send the metta and myself metta in the loss that I may have in that relationship as well. So... But it's a practice. It's a constant practice. And I can't own what they do or what they don't do. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Don. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I'm feeling it's close to the end. I don't have to stand. To me, doing the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that I have done and I'm still doing, is an issue of being present with people. The key of the whole thing is presence. Just being willing to be with whatever is manifesting between both of you, which is the test of all the things that we talked about, attachment and all that other stuff. But I have to tell this story. Bhavani came in to work, and she immediately she had it right away. We worked together probably for 6 months, 5 months. The second time we had, is that all right? I'm going to tell this story. The second time, in terms of being present, it was a good class. We had regulars in those days, which I guess you have again. We had people who were in the program, so we saw them every week. And she did the program. At the end, she was talking to some guy, and then she reaches up and she hugs him. And I went, oh my God! Because if you know anything about working in the state prisons, that immediately gives the prisoner punishment. He is punished, or she, even though you might have initiated it and you can never go there again. I said, oh my God, what's going to happen? Nothing happened.
Except Don's reaction. Thank you.
You had your hand, sir?
Well, yeah, I just had a question about that. You work with ex-prisoners to assimilate themselves back into society. My understanding is there isn't a whole lot of support from the government for ex-prisoners to be able to do that.
So part of my responsibility as a case manager for guys that I work with is to connect them with those services. So if guys that are TXing or being released from the county facility, that we make sure that we connect them with the right services. So whether they had substance abuse or they just need extra support, the Sheriff's Department offers some of those things. One of the programs that they offer is called the NOVA program. It's the No Violence Alliance program. And so they connect men that are coming out of jail with a case manager to help them with all different levels of needs that they may have. Another component that we have in RSVP is called treatment on demand, where if we know that a guy is leaving our program but he still wants to continue and go into a substance abuse program, then we make those connections. And so fortunately we have those resources. For guys that are coming out of prison, then we still connect them with the NOVA program. So NOVA extends into people coming back from prison into San Francisco. And then we also have the post-release education program through the Sheriff's Department. And so there's a centralized location where men can come and get services there as well, men and women. So the thing about San Francisco, there's a lot of services available through the Sheriff's Department in San Francisco. And as a case manager, it's my responsibility to make sure that I connect men with those services.
Yeah. What is the most toxic component of the hitman persona?
For me, in my experience with the hitman, it's denial. So I mean, so the hardest guy to work with in the program is the guy that's in denial of his violence. That's like pulling teeth. It's convincing a guy that he's violent. That's not something that we do. And somebody asked me that question, a couple of weeks ago. They're like, yeah, you must have a really hard time, working with the guys who are gang members and the guys who shoot at people and that are really violent. I'm like, no, those are the easiest guys to work with because they know that they're violent. In our process, a guy who knows that he's violent is easy to work with. The guy who's in complete denial and off the focus of his violent behavior, he's impossible to work with because when a man is working with us, he's really coming from a place of victim, right? And for us to work with a man in his victim role, it's very difficult. So for me, the two things about the hitman behaviors that they're difficult to work with are a guy who's in his victim role and a guy who's in complete denial of his violence. Those are very difficult to work with. But and ironically, the guy that knows that he's violent and he knows that he can beat everybody up, that's the guy that does well in our program, because he already can identify where he's at, because we talk about a superior attitude, and so the guy who knows that violence gets him what he wants, he understands that superior attitude. So that's what's hard to work with, is the victim role and guys in denial of their violence.
Bhavani and Ivan, thank you so much, especially for giving us such a great example of how of a practical use in the world of the things that we read about, learn about, and teach, and try, and you're out there, putting it to very good use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any announcements? Jim?
Yeah, next week we have a group, we'll break down into small groups and have discussion. And the week after that, we have our very own Shantanu Gupta, who will speak about his wide range of experience and expertise.
Harley.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that today is the first Sunday of the month, and it's the free admission to the Asian Art Museum. And there's a wonderful exhibit on Shanghai art, as well as all the wonderful treasures at the museum today.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I'm Kei Matsuda, and I'm the host coordinator for GBF, and I'd like to announce that there are a couple of vacancies on the hosting team. One for the regular host position, the other one is a substitute host position. So if you're interested, please let me know. Thank you.
And do we have a host today?
Yes. There's there's tea, and there's some fruit and some cookies. Please help yourself. If you do drink tea, please rinse out your cup. I'll be coming around with the Donegal, and your generosity will be greatly appreciated.
And there's also a newsletter that we just mailed out last week, but there's extras there that you can pick up, and as well as a sign-up sheet if you'd like to be on the newsletter list. And there's a directory out there as well.
And there's a group that meets for lunch at 12:30 by the door, so if you're interested, they're usually floating around that vicinity.
Jack? Was that good? Okay. Any other announcements before we close up? Good. Would you lead us in a closing dedication?
Yeah. May the benefit and merit of our practice here together be for the benefit of all beings everywhere, for every one of us in this room, for all of those who are incarcerated, whether they're incarcerated physically in a jail or prison, or whether they're incarcerated in their mind. And may it be for the benefit of all the victims of violence, the perpetrators of violence. May all of us find the true nature of our heart and know that that is the wisdom and compassion.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.